Hello there.
Don't have a good day. Have a great day.
Talk to me, Goose.
I'm gonna steal the Declaration of Independence.
Why so serious?
World! I could do this all day.
Are you watching closely?
Welcome everybody to the One-Eyed Film Podcast. I'm your host Seth Mossberg, and welcome to our first YouTube video. Let's go. We got Josh with us today. We're testing out our cameras for the first time. We're trying out a new style of podcast just to be able to connect with you on a different level, with you being able to see our faces, and a different way to consume the podcast if you so choose, if you want to watch it rather than listen to it. We got some of that. Might be editing in some clips here and there, but we're excited to try this out and excited to hear your feedback on it. Let us know in all of our places, like on Discord, on our Instagram, what you think of this. If you would rather listen on Spotify, or if you'd rather watch on YouTube or listen on YouTube, you don't have to watch. Maybe it's just a different medium. We would love to hear from you, and we're excited. Josh, welcome back.
Yeah, glad to be back. I love talking about movies. I'll always be on here. You guys will get sick of me. Okay.
Let's get down to what we're here for. We're talking about Prince of Egypt today, and this one is a little interesting because there is a second part that not a lot of people know about. It's the musical that came out 3 years ago, and I'm excited to talk about that too. Mm-hmm. This whole movie and kind of the story behind it, anything that people have to say about it is really cool to talk about. So let's talk about it. That's what this podcast is for.
Yeah.
So the Prince of Egypt has always had a place in my heart. It was one of those movies I just never could get enough of watching as a kid. It was a really good kids movie. It's the story of Moses, and it just did not deviate that far from the biblical story enough for Christian parents to be like, oh, it's not good enough for our kids to watch. It was actually pretty close retelling of the biblical account. And as there were some things that didn't necessarily line up, which is fine. Yeah. It's not a Christian, it wasn't a Christian company making it. It was DreamWorks. But considering that DreamWorks took a story from the Bible and made it into a fully animated movie, such an amazing cast. Have you seen the cast list? It's Val Kilmer as Moses, Ralph Fiennes as Ramses, Sandra Bullock, Steve Martin, Martin Short, Patrick Stewart, Michelle Pfeiffer, Jeff Goldblum. Why does this movie get slept on so much? I believe it's probably because of its biblical grounding. But I know Shafrillis Productions has rated this movie as his #1 DreamWorks movie, which is saying something. And I really appreciate someone who doesn't have a Christian background to like it as much as I do. I think it's really that foot in the door where you can have somebody watch an entertaining movie that was made well by a professional company and be able to talk about this real story that happened, which again is amazing as is, and they just adapted to be a little bit more theatrical, and I'm okay with that. You can lead into a conversation about the actual biblical account.
You basically just said exactly what I was thinking. The cast is stacked. And they made not only an entertaining kids movie, but I still get chills watching The Parting of the Red Sea. I can go back to it as many times as I want over the years. It aged like fine wine. Not that I drink wine, but it aged so well. Looks great. I love the idea of being able to play it at a Bible camp or something. It lights up the room just because it's a good movie. Good acting, great music, which I listened to the musical that you were talking about. Mm-hmm. Regretfully, it was while I was going to bed, so I had the men's choir singing Salt and stuff like that as I was going to bed.
Mud, water.
Not very fitting if you're trying to fall asleep, but still beautiful music. I can't praise the movie enough. Maybe I'm biased because it's about one of my favorite books, the Bible.
So just a couple of things to address. Like I said, there are some inaccuracies which we can overlook. Having an 80-year-old Moses come back to save the Israelites isn't really dramatic as you would want for a movie. So I understand keeping him young, 30s-ish. But on top of that, there's some people who take problem with that Ramesses is not the Pharaoh of the Exodus. And there's this really cool documentary that I watched a couple years ago, and they've continued to make them by a man named Tim Mahoney, based here in Minnesota, who makes Patterns of Evidence. And the one specifically that I remember watching was Patterns of Evidence Exodus, looking at actual archaeological finds and pairing them up with the Bible to see how they relate. And you need to watch it for yourself. I can't just explain it here, but he makes a very strong argument for why Ramesses was not the Pharaoh of the Exodus, and why it's this other, I believe, Amenhotep II. Don't quote me on that. I believe that's the pharaoh that he believes was the Exodus Pharaoh, because we see economic decline in that time of that Pharaoh. So there's just a bunch of things. I'd highly encourage you to watch it. I'll leave a link down in the description for you to go check it out. I believe it's on Amazon. It's a very entertaining documentary. Most documentaries can be boring, but this one is actually fun to watch because there's reenactment, there's diagrams and everything. I find that interesting. So give that a watch.
Another difference that I think is definitely worth pointing out is Moses's brother Aaron not being in the movie. Personally, I do kind of wish that he was in there.
He was. He
was
most
he?
definitely was. He's played by Jeff Goldblum.
Oh, hang on, he's
Look at
in
him up.
there?
Yeah, look him up.
He's in the actor list. Wasn't Aaron in the Bible though? He talks for Moses though, right?
Yeah,
And,
I would say
that's different.
I would say in the movie, Aaron is underutilized compared to how he
Yeah.
actually was, because Moses does do the
Yeah.
talking.
Okay.
Like they add him. You don't know that Aaron was in the movie?
How did I miss that it was Jeff Goldblum? I knew Aaron was in the movie,
Oh.
but like he wasn't so heavy. How did I not know Jeff Gold?
Okay, but that's the thing. These actors kind of fly under the radar. Like maybe this is because I grew up listening to them, and then later in life I was like, yeah, that's the same voice I know from whatever else. So I think one thing that this movie really nailed was the music. And Steven Schwartz, who went on to compose the Wicked soundtrack, just did a phenomenal job. He composed the original score for this entire movie, and I think that's why it's just a hit. He's obviously professionally trained. They weren't going to hire some bum to write their score. Like obviously it's going to be good.
Yeah.
But like it's good. It's really good. The singing is something else. And on top of that, you have the Whitney Houston version of When You Believe that was so popular for so long. It was incredible. It
I
chills.
still get chills every single time. And the very first song too, Deliver Us, one of my favorite musical songs of all time.
Mhm.
I love the bassiness of it, and then you have What's Her Face coming in and hitting all of those high notes.
Yeah, Moses' mom.
My ears love it.
Yeah, Moses'
Yeah.
mom picking up that solo halfway in. And again, I just think on top of the score, taking an already dramatic Bible movie and making it not changing it so that its meaning is lost, but changing it so that it's dramatic for a movie is really commendable. And I mean, this was made back in the 90s, late 90s. It probably wouldn't be made again, but it shows when you look past all of the discrepancies and differences, it shows that the Bible stories are entertaining and that it actually happened. Like technically this is a historical fiction, but it shows that the Bible is cool and that it's not just a boring history book. There's a lot more to it. And like I said, you can use this to draw people to talk more about this story, the actual story that happened.
Yeah.
As much as movies often don't get Bible stories right. Like I think of Russell Crowe's Noah and how a lot of people didn't like that movie because it was so inaccurate to the Bible. I still haven't watched it. I plan on doing an episode on it. But a lot of people were just frustrated with blatant disregard for the biblical account and how it wasn't accurate.
Mm-hmm.
Like the most they got right was the ark and Noah, and anything else they just kind of threw in. This movie, they stuck to the Bible as the source material in order to lay out the entire story and then fill in the gaps where the Bible doesn't cover it, like the brotherhood. I think it is incredibly creative to take the concept that Moses grew up in Egypt and then came back to Egypt 40 years later. Granted, it wasn't 40 years in the movie, but he came back and his brother, or the person he grew up with, his half-brother, is now Pharaoh. That is totally plausible that the man that he told, let my people go, was somebody he grew up with. That is, whoever came up with that concept and pushed this movie forward, so creative, and I love that person, whoever they are, that could have happened, and it's so dramatic. And we'll talk about that a little bit when we get to the musical. That is honestly what drives the story forward, is that connection between Ramesses and Moses.
Yeah, so good. Reading through the Bible, so when I was a kid, I watched the movie, obviously. And reading through the Bible on my own now, I can't think of it any other way. I think of it as Moses' brother, even though it doesn't say anything.
Yeah. But we also want to be careful.
Mind-blowing.
We also want to be careful. My dad has talked about this with The Chosen, that we don't want a fictional piece, or even a historical fictional piece of media, to influence how we read the Bible. Yes, it can be fun to watch, for sure. We should not picture, in the example of The Chosen, we should not picture Jonathan Rumi as Jesus. Jesus was Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
Jonathan Rumi is Jonathan Rumi playing Jesus. That should not cross any lines. But at the same time, we'll do a full episode on The Chosen. They're just an easy target. The Chosen brings the disciples and the side characters to life, and helps us realize that they were real people and that they had fights and they had problems and they worked through them. Same with this movie. Seeing Moses be brothers with Ramesses for that first part of the movie, and how letting them be so casual and not even technically using lines from the Bible until probably the burning bush. It just makes it real and makes it feel like they could have been real. And that's what the movies are supposed to do. They're supposed to bring the stories to life. And they did that so well.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say it one more time. They did it so well.
Yep.
It's okay. If we keep talking about how well they made the story so cinematic and just entertaining to make you realize that the Bible is more than just words on a page, it's a story, we could be here all day praising how well that they did it. They did a great job.
Yeah. I wanted to talk quick about the animation because I do have a degree in animation if you didn't know this. I've mentioned it a couple times. This was the era where they kind of were using 2D and 3D animation. You see this in Curious George, another good movie. It has no right being that good. But there are a number of movies who are starting to blend 2D and 3D. I believe Treasure Planet was doing this too around the same time. They were kind of experimenting because, Toy Story had just done really well. And so they weren't ready to go full 3D because Disney Pixar had kind of taken the helm for that to do full 3D movies. But a mix between 2D and 3D actually is one of my favorite styles, where you can have the style look similar, but you can tell that this movement is not something that they created by drawing out. It had to be modeled, it had to be animated, and yet it doesn't look realistic. They still made it look like the drawing. It fit with the world, but there's something different about how it pans or how it moves the camera or something, and I love that style. I just had to mention that.
Yeah, and you're actually seeing it come back. It took a bit of a break, but it's coming back with stuff like Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, Puss in Boots, Arcane, stuff that we've talked about, and it's got more of a modern twist to it, yeah, but it's only been elevated. I loved the idea, or that kind of animation, way back when, still do, but it's only gotten better, and I will say that it is also my favorite form of animation, form of a movie, regardless.
Yep. That style that's coming back in those movies that you referenced is a different type though. It's using 3D characters in a 2D environment. Whereas back in the 90s when they were trying this with those movies I mentioned, Treasure Planet, Curious George, Prince of Egypt, it was 3D environments and 2D characters. And so they flipped it. And I think I personally like those movies better, just visually. I love the movies that you mentioned because of the same reasons, but it looks different. It has a different style. So I was really excited. I believe it was late 2019 when they announced that they were making a musical on Prince of Egypt. And it wasn't Broadway. It was London's West End, which is the equivalent. It's a big theater, high budget. And when they announced that Stephen Schwartz was coming back to recompose and also make new songs, that blew my mind. I was so excited. I really, really loved the new soundtrack. I didn't like it at first. I listened to it and I was like, yeah, they added a couple songs I'm not a fan of. And then they grew on me. If you haven't listened to it, you need to listen to it. I will link it in the description so you can go listen to the entire playlist. It is a new and improved, 20 years later type of reimagining of the original score. Really fun to listen to. The actors are now Broadway level actors, West End level actors, and they nail it. I think that Luke Brady playing Moses really nails the Moses character. Like I heard it and I was like, that's Moses. Like maybe that's just how I remember Val Kilmer playing him in the movie, but he nailed it. I really think that he was the perfect cast for that role, and the other cast does phenomenal as well.
Yeah.
What did you think when you first listened to it, which was only a couple weeks ago?
First time listening, I like the classics. And for me, the classics was the original soundtrack as well. And listened to it a second time in the morning rather than trying to fall asleep to it. And that time it was much more effective because I was digesting it while I was on my way to work. And it is, I don't want to put it above the original, but I definitely say it's just as good. It is beautiful, quite honestly. To give a word to it, I definitely think it's beautiful. And I'd put them both in the same playlist and just let Shuffle pick which one I want to listen to.
Interesting. I think Schwartz really took it and ran with it the way he had written it 20 years ago. Like, he probably was like, there's not much, if it's not broke, don't fix it.
Yeah.
But there, at the same time, you're listening to it, you've listened to the original score, you know what it sounds like, and then you hear something and you're like, that was a little different. I don't know if I like it, I don't know if I hate it, Yeah. Then there were some big changes. There were some changes to the Plagues song, and there were some additions like Footprints on the Sand, those grew on me pretty quickly. I should say, I have not seen the musical. It's in London. I have not gone to London to see it. However, it has been recorded, and Universal Pictures owns the rights to it to someday put it out on streaming. And I will see it when it comes out. But there's a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff. My sister really filled me in on a lot of stuff. Obviously, you can listen to the soundtrack and kind of get a feel for what they changed and what they didn't. These songs that they changed and added really grew on me quickly because, as I mentioned before, there is this obvious battle between brothers and how they were raised the same, and yet knowing that Moses was an Israelite and Ramesses was an Egyptian, and yet they worked together as brothers. Like, they loved each other, and they like messed with each other, like in the newer song Faster, where they were racing horses. That's one of the things where if you know the story from the movie and you listen to the new musical soundtrack, you understand that Faster is all about that chariot race, and there wasn't a song for that in the movie, but you can still enjoy it as if you're watching it. So they have that playfulness in Faster, and they're trying to beat each other, and they both yell, "I win!" at the same time. But the way that Schwartz changed the Plague song to be very back and forth and really grew on me. Like, at first I was like, it's not the same as it used to be. But then I was like, wait, this is like very thematic in how he wrote it. And he keeps going back to these themes and melodies that started in songs like One Weak Link or For the Rest of My Life, which are, again, original songs for the musical, not for the movie. Wraps those into the either battle scenes in the Plague scenes where they're going at it back and forth, or in the finale, the Act 2 finale. They kind of have this bonding moment, which, again, that is a discrepancy that doesn't happen in the Bible, but there's this almost unity for the good, happy feeling at the end. I'm willing to overlook for dramatic purposes, is all I'll say. But, like, yeah, the way that wrote new songs and they all mesh together into a cohesive feel and movement of the story, I really enjoyed as I listened to the new one.
Yeah, it's definitely an experience. If you haven't listened to them, you've just got to. Loved them. I wasn't a huge fan of that kind of that they had at the end. I'm still willing to look past it, but I think you're a little bit more gracious about it than I am.
Yeah.
But that's my only thought.
The reason I choose to look over it so quickly and without question, I suppose, is because it doesn't change my faith. It doesn't make me question, what if Moses and Ramesses or whoever unified? Well, if that actually happened, that would actually be detrimental to the story of the Bible. And yet I know that didn't happen, and that's not going to affect my faith. I know what the story is, and when it's not informing my perspective of what the Bible says, then I am willing to put it to the side and say some creative liberties.
I am personally not as for it. I can definitely get like the adding to the dramatic feel. Plus, honestly, you can even turn it into a conversation like, yeah, this story is great, but talking to an unbeliever, you can even be like, hey, story's pretty much the same, but these are a few differences. Let me show you in the Bible, and then you start getting them to look at the Bible. That's a great way to lead into it. But for me personally, I'm just not a huge fan of changing the Bible because Bible's perfect. It says it. Yeah, that's just my reasoning. Again, I don't think there's a fault in yours either. It's just a difference in opinions, and that's the way that it is. It is what it is.
Yeah. Do you guys know that you can disagree with people and not have to be right? Or you can both be right, or you can both be wrong. You can just be cool with that.
You can just go on your day and have your opinion.
That's crazy.
It's that easy.
So there's one thing that I wanted to talk about, and it's Footprints on the Sand, original to the musical. One of my favorites. I really grew to love it. I sang it for a show that we did, just a little cabaret where we sang in front of a bunch of people just for fun. It talks about wanting to leave a mark on the world and yet being washed away, because this is the point where Moses has just ran away from Egypt and he's feeling as though he has no purpose because he just killed a man and he doesn't know what's ahead of him. And he's praying to the gods because he was raised by Egyptians. But he says, am I going to make a difference in this world? Is anyone going to remember me? And this is before, obviously, the burning bush, where he turns into the patriarch of the Jews and the Israelites. And I think this is where Schwartz continued to use the Bible as inspiration, where obviously we know the name Moses as the leader of Israel out of Egypt, out of the Exodus, and having him in this state of uncertainty, which I have felt multiple times recently in my life, of uncertainty of where do I go from here? Will I leave a mark on this world? And writing it into a song where he expresses himself to really ponder what God has for him. And on top of that, we can go a level deeper. where the Moses that was written into this story, at least in the musical, really wants to make a difference. That's why Footprints on the Sand exists. He wants to be remembered. And he feels like he's just going to be swept away by the winds of time, is what he says. And then at the end of the musical, he gets to sing with Ramesses about being remembered and not being footprints on the sand and being a name that people will recognize. And that's true. It did happen. But I was listening to a sermon, and unfortunately I don't remember what the exact sermon was about, but he read Exodus 32:32. This was right after the Israelites had made the golden calf, or Aaron had made them the golden calf, and they were worshiping it. Moses came down from the mountain and was disappointed in them, more than disappointed. He was upset, he was angry that God had just led them out of Egypt, and they wanted a new God. They felt like a God wasn't enough for them. And again, we can talk a lot about how we do the same thing. We criticize them for doing it, but then we do the exact same thing. Yeah. But that's not what I'm talking about. Moses goes back up to talk to God on Mount Sinai, and he says, "Alas, these people have committed a great sin, and they have made a god of gold for themselves. But now, if you will, forgive their sin, and if not, blot me out from your book which you have written." So not only did the writers of the musical put so much emphasis on Moses wanting to be remembered, this character development that we see in the Bible in Exodus 32:32 shows that he doesn't care anymore. Imagine, this didn't happen because the musical is fiction. Imagine they're the same Moses, and Moses wanted to be remembered. As a young man, he wanted to be remembered for all of time. And this character development, as now he's in the wilderness, he's like 90. He now doesn't want that anymore. He realizes there's a much bigger story at play that's bigger than him. And he's willing to be forgotten from all of history for the sake of the Israelites that he knows as God's chosen people, and he has a much bigger plan for him. This is an example where we as Christians can get so much more out of a movie than anyone who doesn't know the Bible. And I don't think the writers intended for this. But when I heard this verse, I immediately thought of the musical and the song Footprints on the Sand, where Moses was so adamant that he needed to make a difference. And now when he's at the end of his rope and the people that he's led out of Egypt are rebelling, he is now asking to basically sacrifice himself. God, blot me out from your book so that I am a nobody and I will not be remembered for the sake of your people. If that's not bars, I don't know what is, man.
Moses does this a lot where he just has like such a significant line about what he's thinking in this given time. He says this, and you may know this already about me because of previous episodes. I love to try and put myself in the shoes of every person that's in the movie, book I'm reading, especially the Bible, and I think you get a much greater understanding of like why they're actually writing all of this down. For example, David, he writes a lot of the Psalms and the Proverbs, and if you can put yourself in their shoes, it's just so much better. And lines like you just, or verses, I should say, not lines, this isn't actual bars, it's poetry. In Exodus 30:32, like you mentioned, it really just, you know exactly what's going through their head, and it's like, I quit caring. I just want what you want, Lord, basically. That's so cool to me. I love that. I thought of that as well when I was listening to the song Footprints on the Sand, like you were, and I immediately thought of not necessarily that verse exactly, but I thought of the scenario about what Moses was thinking. Like an audible, oh wow, came out of me when I was reading that from my Bible. In prep for this episode, I wanted to read through Exodus, not the whole book because that would have taken me more time than I had, but I wanted to read through Moses in his role, and the Prince of Egypt doesn't do Moses' story enough justice. After reading the Bible directly, there's so much more to it than just what happened in the movie. And yes, the movie gives us a good cinematic of what happened, but the thought process of Moses afterwards is, from what I got, was more entertaining, honestly. And it's a good read, real page turner.
Yeah, there's definitely things that they left out because it's a little expository and not dramatic, like I said. But his whole debate basically with God at the burning bush is very interesting to read, and understanding where Moses was coming from, a very shy yet not willing to change type of man, really making excuses and not wanting to do anything. And then turning that on ourselves and seeing like how much of that do we see in ourselves, and what do we not want to do because God's calling us out of our comfort zone. And there's probably thousands of sermons out there on Moses and the type of man that he was and the type of man that he became, and yet areas that he still fell short. Like, he still was very prideful and struck the rock instead of telling it to bring forth water. It just, in some ways he changed, in some ways he didn't. And that's real life character development that actually happened.
Yeah.
And
we see that in the Bible, and the people like to overlook the fact that the Bible actually has what every movie nowadays has. It has excitement, it has action, it has character development, it has sad stories, it has exciting stories, and throughout the whole thing, it also has a constant, and that is God, and I love that.
As a wise man once said, bars.
Indeed.
Indeed. Well, that's going to wrap it up for this week's episode of the One Eyed Film Podcast. Thank you guys so much for listening. We hope that you can share this with your friends if you enjoyed it. Give us a 5 stars, a thumbs up, subscribe. Subscribe and hit that bell. We're not shameful of how we will beg for your views and your subscriptions. Please, 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 please. Just keep up to date with all of the things that we have going on. Follow our Instagram, join our Discord. We got so much good stuff going on.
Oh, good stuff.
Good stuff. Good stuff. We got a lot of exciting stuff coming up. We just love doing this. We love talking with each other and talking with you. We just want to grow this community of movie loving Christians because you're out there, you're listening to this, and I hope that we can have some good discussion wherever, and I hope that we can have some good discussion on this. Thank you, Josh, so much for joining me today.
It's been awesome. Love you.
It usually is. We hope you guys have a great rest of your day. We love you. Peace out.
Bye, guys.